this isn't just a short-term blip. These prices are here, maybe not to stay at exactly the same level, but they're going to stay at a profitable level into the midterm. The world is tight for beef supply. The demand around the world is phenomenal and growing. And really, Irish beef producers are doing a great job. They're in an amazing part of the world for producing beef.
Hello and welcome to The Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and with the Teagasc National Beef Conference taking place, I'm joined by one of the speakers, Rupert Claxton, Meat and Livestock Director with GIRA, to get an insight into the future of the beef market nationally and internationally. Rupert, thanks very much for joining me. We've seen record beef prices globally. What's driving these increases?
The reality is that we're tight, not just for beef supply globally, but for all meat. So although there is more pork and a little bit more poultry in the world at the moment than there was last year, it's not enough for where we see the demand going around the world. So that increase in demand for meat, the slight tightness in supply, means that we're seeing all meats go up, and it's allowed the beef prices to really boom. Now, there are then within the sector specific drivers. You know, for me, the key there is that the US is really tight for beef today, and they're prepared to pay for more. So that tightness in the US, caused by 3 years of drought, has led to a big import surge into the US. You know, it didn't start this year, it started last year, but it's certainly scaled up this year. And that creates more tightness around the world. So that's been a really positive story for beef prices. And within Europe, we're, you know, not just Ireland, but the UK and the mainland of Europe is short for beef production. We see that's fallen again this year. It's structural. We don't see it recovering in the short or midterm, to be honest. And so those prices are really driven by a shortage of supply and good underlying demand for meat.
And what can Irish farmers expect to see in 2026 and beyond in relation to prices?
The key message there is that the prices should stay strong. My expectation is that they might back off a little bit in the first quarter, just as we come away from Christmas. And consumers look at their spending and think about how expensive beef is. And certainly the European retailers think about what product they want at what prices on their shelves. But I think as the year goes on, it's positive. I don't expect the prices to fall very far, to be honest. And that's, you know, the good news is there that price stays high. The feed price is expected to stay low, certainly through the first half of next year. And I see no serious reason, barring a big weather event, that changes as the year progresses. So we'll be able to put cheap feed into cattle, and expensive cattle, to be fair. And that's good news across the industry.
And looking at the Mercosur deal, what impact do you think that will have for Irish beef farmers?
Look, Mercosur is almost certainly going to happen. Our expectation is that will be signed in some form by the end of the year, and that we'll see beef under that entering into Europe in the second half of the year. Because there's still a lot of work to be done on the South American end of that as to which countries have how much access and use of that 100,000 tons of quota. So, you know, it doesn't enter immediately. It's going to come. The reality for me is that Europe over the last 7 years has lost over 800,000 tons of beef production across the EU 27. And when you factor that in, you can understand that we're going to need some product to support the market. So that product will fit into the market. I don't think it's going to come and you know, flatten the price back to where it was 5 years ago. It's one of the indicators that, you know, we think it might take a slight edge off the price. But the reality is it's going to be a small drop. Probably prime cuts spread across the European market is the most likely thing. And it's likely to compete, you know, not in the UK, because the UK is outside that Mercosur deal now, but it will compete to some extent with Irish beef food service in mainland Europe. And that's the bit we look at. But I don't think there's enough of it to seriously undermine the prices as it stands.
The UK retailers, they are trialling non-EU beef. What changes at farm level or industry level do you think are most important to stay competitive?
The reality is that we know that Irish beef isn't going to compete with Brazilian on a straight price fight. So it's not about price. It has to become about the service, the quality, the authenticity of the supply chain, and the pieces around that. And you have to continue to tell that story about why should people buy Irish over other origins. To date, that's been done very well. But clearly we're at a point, you know, in somewhere like the UK, where the retailers have got to look to have an alternative source, and they can't be reliant on just, you know, one international supplier. So they are now trialing some South American beef, they trialed some Australian beef, so far they haven't found quite the right relationship with those suppliers. And I don't think they're serious yet about bringing it in. But if these prices persist and the Irish supply gets tighter, then yeah, they're going to look at that. And it will have to be a story that they tell on how they position it. And Ireland has to continue to tell the story about having those European animal welfare production standards and traceability that the retailers can pin their brands to and continue to have as one of their main supply sources.
From what you've seen globally, how are consumers reacting to the higher retail beef prices on the shelf?
As you look around the world, the stories will look a bit different. And if you take the Asian markets, where people are coming off a very low meat consumption or beef consumption anyway, they're relatively resilient because they don't know better. This beef is expensive and they're prepared to pay for it as a luxury product. That's a positive, really, going forward. In Europe, it's a bit more complicated. They're definitely seeing some down trading. We're seeing people less inclined to buy high-value cuts out at food service. We're seeing some of those trading away to either, if you go to a pub, for instance, you might not buy a steak, you might buy a burger instead because of the price point. I think the quality of the beef is still great. I think the way that we're cutting it thinner and thinner is to try and get those retail price points and even the food service price points is a challenge for the product in the short term. And consumers are looking for sort of budget-friendly product, and that hasn't favoured beef. And we've seen it historically. We saw it in COVID. We saw it further back in the global financial crash. At times like this, we see chicken demand pick up. And you can see that. If you looked at the US market, you would see that they are eating more chicken than they have done. And interestingly, they're actually eating more chicken thighs, not a product that normally sells in the US. Normally something that goes to export. But they're paying more for those at the moment because they need that extra protein and they're looking for a price point on it.
From your experience, Rupert, what structural changes do you think will offer the best long-term sustainability and profitability for Irish beef producers?
I think, you're already beginning to see some of that, and the effort being made to drive generational change on the farms in Ireland is part of this story. There's got to be some scaling up at a farm level because those farm businesses have to be able to return a living to the next generation, and you can't do that off the scale where you are today. So as we go through the generational change, some of those farms are going to be sold or they'll be leased or consolidated into bigger units, which will allow for a more concerted commercial effort in production. But that's good news because we want the farmers to be at a point where they're making a living out of producing beef. The prices today are part of that story, but the structure of it has to be part of it as well. So we're seeing that. We're seeing an effort within the Irish industry to drive and support that transition. And it's a challenge. If I look across Europe, a lot of what we face today is because we have this lack of generational progression in farming, and it's especially acute in suckler herds, if I'm honest, because of the nature of them. So that scale and the reality of being able to make a living out of cattle is part of it. And then obviously we've got to look after the downstream. So, much as the farmers will begrudge it, we do need to see that the factories, the slaughter plants can continue to make a profit out of this, and they can continue to connect the farms to the market, and that they can represent Irish beef at the best standard around the world. So there's a little bit of work to be done there in consolidating those assets in the factories. And I think what we'll see is probably the same number of companies operating, but I suspect that they'll operate fewer plants in the future, but they'll be able to invest in them for the mid and long term, which is essential for the industry.
That's great, Rupert. And finally, I suppose for farmers listening today, what's the most important message you have from your presentation from the current global beef situation?
I think that the key message is that this isn't just a short-term blip. These prices are here, maybe not to stay at exactly the same level, but they're going to stay at a profitable level into the midterm. The world is tight for beef supply. The demand around the world is phenomenal and growing. And really, Irish beef producers are doing a great job. They're in an amazing part of the world for producing beef. And they just need to not let all the negatives get them down, focus on what they do well, and the fact that there is a profit to be made there in the business now.
That's great. Thanks very much, Rupert. That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Rupert for joining me on the show. All proceedings from the Teagasc National Beef Conference are available on the Teagasc website. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan and thanks for listening.